His family history includes the story of the beer that made Milwaukee famous. We're going to raise a toast to the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company with Peter Uihlein. He's my special guest next on I Remember. Hi, I'm Jim Peck. Welcome to I Remember. Joining me tonight is Peter Uihlein. He's a former Schlitz employee and the fourth generation of the Uihlein family that ran the brewery for over a century. The story of the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company began in Milwaukee in the 1800s. Take a look.
The story of Schlitz Brewing begins with August Krug, a Bavarian immigrant who opened a brewery in Milwaukee in 1849. A few years after Krug died, his wife Anna married the bookkeeper, Joseph Schlitz. He took control of the brewery, and it was renamed the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company in 1856. August Uihlein, the nephew of the original owner, August Krug, came from Germany as a child. He would become an important figure in the brewery. His brothers later immigrated, and the Uihlein family ran the brewery after the death of Joseph Schlitz in 1875. It was already the beer that made Milwaukee famous due to the hundreds of barrels sent to Chicago after the Great Fire of 1871. Peter Uihlein's great-grandfather, Henry Uihlein, was the brother who served as president of the brewery from 1879 until 1922. In 1902, Schlitz was the biggest brewery in the world, selling over 1 million barrels of beer. The famous Schlitz Palm Garden at the Schlitz Hotel was a popular spot in Milwaukee at the turn of the century. In 1963, Schlitz brought the Great Circus Parade to downtown Milwaukee and was the parade sponsor for many years. The spectacular 40-horse hitch first appeared in the 1972 parade, and the next year the new Schlitz bandwagon was added, the first circus wagon of its kind built in decades. Robert Uihlein Jr. became president of Schlitz in 1961. He was the CEO and chairman when he died in 1976, the last Uihlein to head the company. The 1970 ad campaign was to grab for all the gusto you can. But by the end of the decade, sales were slipping for the company. The Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company closed its doors in the city it made famous, and the company was sold in 1982. In his book, Schlitz Brewing Art, photographer Paul Bialis captured the legacy of the brewhouse before it was torn down in 2013.
How did, indeed, Schlitz make Milwaukee famous?
I would say through the beer. This being the beer capital of the world, Schlitz is one of the few breweries to last in Milwaukee. Pabst, Schlitz, and Miller were the only three remaining breweries in Milwaukee at the time in the early 80s when Schlitz closed. But it was the German heritage, the German people that came over to duplicate their profession from Germany, and they found the proper climate, the proper ingredients, water.
Water was critical, wasn't it?
Very critical.
When did that slogan come about, do you know?
The beer that made Milwaukee famous, the best known one, it was created after the Chicago that big Chicago fire in 1871.
Oh, really?
They lost all of their breweries in the fire, and they lost all their drinking water in the fire. And so Schlitz found an opportunity to get the beer out of the city and start selling it regionally. And so they started shipping rail car loads of it down to Chicago, and people were saying, what kind of beer is that? And somebody said, well, that's Schlitz beer from Milwaukee, and somebody coined that phrase, the beer that made Milwaukee famous.
It was a genius.
Really.
But it was interesting that they ran out of water and beer, and we sent beer.
We sent beer. Today, the modern breweries send water to disaster relief. Yeah, that's right.
I was thinking as I was preparing for the show, Peter, that here's an Uihlein who worked for Schlitz Brewery. Kind of a no-brainer. I mean, that was really your birthright as an Uihlein to work for the brewery, wasn't it?
It really wasn't. I had to work very hard to get a job.
Seriously?
There were many Uihleins that had worked at the brewery up until the 1950s. The board of directors around 1960 was made up of about a dozen Uihleins and 2 or 3 other people related to the Uihlein family. This is when the company was still 100% privately owned by the family.
Okay.
When I graduated from college, I wanted to work for Schlitz, and I had made it known to a lot of people, but it wasn't to happen. They
Why?
said, I found out after 2 interviews that the person that interviewed with me leveled with me and said, not going to happen because they don't want to hire any more Uihleins. And yet there were no Uihleins working there aside from Bob Uihlein, who was the president at that time. Fred Uihlein was there, and then Bob Traynor.
And your dad was on the board.
And my father was on the board, but my father could not go to bat for Sonny Boy. So I worked with a number of directors, convincing these directors, you've got to change this policy because you're going to look around in a few years and realize there are no more Uihleins working here. They changed the policy, and in 1976, they hired me. And so it was pretty much similar to a student going, there's no such thing as a walk-on in football. I had to work out and get this job. I was not a walk-on in this job.
Wow. And why didn't they want more Uihleins?
They were afraid that we would just come in at 8 in the morning, have a beer, put our feet up on the table, go out for lunch, and go out and play golf. I told them that I would work. And I knew I'd have a lot of eyes and ears, eyes watching me and ears listening to me as to what I'm doing. And so I had to work twice as hard and convince people I was not a spy. Some people thought I might have been a spy.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Didn't the other people you worked with say, well, wait a minute, he's the company. We can't talk in front of him.
I had an agreement with my father that we wouldn't talk business because he couldn't tell me what was going on in the boardroom. I couldn't tell him what was going on at the bar. And Jack McKeithen, who was heading up the company at the time, I was working here in the corporate office. We had an agreement not to discuss business, only general business that anyone could talk about, but not anything behind the scenes.
Didn't that drive you crazy sometimes?
In a way, it did. It's frustrating at times that I see something and I would do what I could to correct something, but I didn't have that magical power.
Yeah. Hey, I'm an Uihlein. I should be able to do this.
I didn't want to go with that term, using that excuse, because it didn't open every door for me. I had to be very careful.
Let's talk a little bit about the brewery. How did the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company start?
In 1849, August Krug and his wife Anna moved here from Germany, settled here in Milwaukee, and started a restaurant and a small brewery with it, similar to today's brew pubs. And a year or so after they started, they asked their nephew, August Uihlein, from Wertheim, Germany, where our family hails from, asked that August come over and have August work with them in the restaurant and brewery.
And he'd have been about how old?
He would have been about 10 years old.
And he's put to work.
10 years old. He was born in 1842. So about
1842.
He was born in 1842, and he was about 10 years old when he came over here in 1852. And he helped his uncle August in the brewing and the beer and the restaurant business. Eventually, they realized that there was more money in beer than there was in bratwurst, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so they decided to concentrate on the brewing aspect of it. During those early years in the early 1850s, August Krug hired a bookkeeper by the name of Joseph Schlitz.
Good idea.
And you got to have a bookkeeper.
Absolutely.
And at August Krug passed away a few years later in the mid-1850s, and his wife Anna, the widow, married the bookkeeper Joseph Schlitz.
Joe was pretty shrewd.
Joe was pretty lucky.
Yeah.
And they were married, and they had no children. But it was written in August Krug's will that the company would be passed on to August Uihlein and his brothers, any brothers that would come over and help work with him. Eventually, in the 1860s, or shortly in the late 1850s, August Uihlein went down to St. Louis to work for a brewery. I'm not sure which one.
I was going to ask.
But they sent him down to St. Louis to hone his brewing skills. His brother Henry, who would be my great-grandfather, joined him in St. Louis, and a brother Edward Uihlein joined him in St. Louis. In the late 1860s, early 70s, they moved back to Milwaukee and helped Joseph Schlitz run the operation.
And what happened to Joseph Schlitz?
Joseph Schlitz went to Europe. On the sailing in those days was not a very safe, was a very risky thing to do. And his ship went down just off of England, and he was lost at sea.
Ooh.
And it was understood.
His ship went down and yours came in.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And he passed away, and it was written in his will also, the understanding that it would be passed down to the Uihlein brothers. And so my great-grandfather Henry became president and was president until 1922 for 43 years that he sat at the helm of the company.
Why didn't it become the Uihlein Brewing Company?
Well, a lot of people look at the name and the way it's spelled, and it's very difficult to pronounce that name. a lot of people have asked me that question before, and I'm glad it wasn't. It would be very difficult. I figure if it was called Uihlein Brewing, I'd be Peter Schlitz.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the fact that it's difficult, and I've got a bottle of beer here that's labeled Uihlein, but this never got to market, did it?
In 1976, we had a national marketing conference. At the time, we introduced Uihlein beer. They showed this label and the advertising and the point of sale to all of the wholesalers nationwide at this major marketing conference, and called it Uihlein beer. About a year later, they did a number of focus groups and determined that nobody could remember how to pronounce the name Uihlein. And so they changed the name to Erlanger before it even came out of the market.
Oh, that's where that came from.
So it went to Erlanger, a very good German name.
It was indeed. As the Schlitz Brewing Company went along, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. How big did it eventually get?
In 1976, our last positive year of sales, we were about 2 million barrels difference with ourselves and Anheuser-Busch, Budweiser, they are known. We were doing 24 million barrels that year, and Anheuser-Busch was 26 million, and getting closer and closer. And then some problems developed.
And I want to come into those a bit later, but let's go back in time a little bit. How did Prohibition affect the Schlitz Brewing Company?
Prohibition affected all brewing companies, but with Schlitz, they knew Prohibition wouldn't last forever. It did last a long time, from the early 20s until 1933.
Yeah, way longer than it should.
Way longer than anyone had wanted to. And so in order to keep the operation going and as many employees as possible working, they developed soft drinks and another very unique product, chocolate.
Well, yeah, I remember, but they didn't call it
Schlitz.
No.
They called it Uihlein, E-L-I-N-E. Now, that you could pronounce phonetically.
Yes, the pronunciation way.
And they built factories, got the best equipment around, the best packaging, and they felt the best product to try and overcome Hershey's. But even in the 1920s, Hershey's was a numero uno brand in this country. And they did all they could to try and get the shelf space of the stores. It didn't work. And they realized that bottling beer was the way to go. And luckily enough, Prohibition was repealed, and they closed up the chocolate factory and went back to beer.
And they were able to make that conversion back? Had they kept the equipment? Or?
They kept the equipment because they were bottling soft drinks.
Ah.
And something called malt extract. Now, malt
Wait a minute. What is malt extract?
Malt extract was sold as a health product.
Yes.
A vitamin-enriched health product.
I'll bet it was, yeah.
But other people may have used it to make their own homemade brew.
Did you think?
No idea. I wasn't around, so I'm safe.
Well, once it leaves the company,
that's right.
What you choose to do with it,
you can't control it. But so they did keep as many people working as possible, making various products. And so when Prohibition was repealed, they were ready to start up and go right to it.
And when international, I notice we have this, the first time this set has ever been decorated by booze, but you've got a lot of different things up there, and one on the camera right, far right, it looks like it's an Arabic.
That is an Arabic can of cereal beverage. We couldn't call it beer.
Oh, really?
Because in that area of the world, they do not believe in alcohol. And our slogan was a beer that made Milwaukee famous. If you turn the can around, it'll say the famous American beverage.
Oh, I love it.
It is a non-alcoholic beer. It's a beer brewed the same way as beer is, but there's no fermentation. It's bottled right away.
I see.
And so they brew it, bottle it, and ship it.
Now you've got a bottle over here. Now we're moving camera left. It's a short bottle, but it kind of looks like the brown bottle, but it isn't. It's red.
It's a ruby red bottle. It was a marketing ploy that they used in the mid-50s of using a special red glass. If you put a light behind it, it really looks elegant, as they say. It's a ruby red bottle. Schlitz is the only company to use that bottle, and it became very expensive because the glass company said, we can't make this just for one brewery. And so they upped the price, and they destroyed that bottle and went with the traditional brown bottle.
Who came up with the idea of the brown bottle? That was revolutionary.
That was at the time because beer came in light-colored bottles.
Right.
And it was a known factor that light would break the beer down. And so somebody at Schlitz said, why don't we try it in a brown bottle? And now the industry has gone to brown bottles, with the exception of a couple labels.
Right, and there are other things. See, the cans up there, that was revolutionary, too.
The cans were revolutionary. The one on the second to the right is a cone top can that came out in the 1940s. It was the first type of can that came out. Now, I don't believe Schlitz developed that can, but all the breweries picked up on the can because it was lighter to ship. Less expensive and more durable. Glass is very heavy. Most beer came in the long neck returnable bottles that were used, washed. They were good for about eight to 10 trips.
And was the pop top a Schlitz invention?
They created that in the 60s. It was a ring that stayed on the can. Yeah. And then, that was pulled off the can, and it turned out to be somewhat of a liability because kids would cut themselves on it, or people would cut their fingers on it.
I remember those.
And so they finally created the detachable pop top, and that revolutionized the industry because it did away with the church key.
Absolutely, you destroyed an entire other industry.
That's right.
Okay, let's come back to Schlitz doing fabulously, almost #1 in the world. What went wrong with Schlitz?
In the mid-'70s, somebody made the decision to shorten the fermentation process and make it more of an artificial fermentation process, which is too bad. And nobody knew about it. This was done unbeknownst to a lot of people. And
you mean a lot of people in the brewery?
A lot of people in the brewery. I think a lot of the management is not aware of this. And they essentially artificially fermented the beer and sped up the process. Normally takes about 90 to 120 days for beer to ferment and age. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to turn around and try and do it in less time to put more beer out because there was so much demand at that time for Schlitz products. And bad beer went out in the market, and it took Schlitz quite a while to recognize the fact. But it was corrected, but
no, there are stories of almost like solid matter in the beer.
Flakes and particles. Yeah. It sounds
better than solid matter. I'm sorry.
and I was working out in the trade at that time. I was working in Colorado and then Iowa, living in Iowa, working with a half a dozen wholesalers. And it was tough when a wholesaler would come in and say, our beer is not holding up. We're picking it up at retail establishments and having to replace it. And I would have to notify the people above me. And it was very frustrating. But as time went on, and near the time that Schlitz was sold, the beer came back with the effort of the new management team that Jack McKeithen put together.
Right.
And it was very encouraging. The product came back. We had terrific commercials, but just not enough time when we had the call it unfriendly takeover.
Yeah, you lose people's trust. It takes a long time to get it back.
That's right. It does.
Nothing is more trustworthy than a good beer.
That's right. You can't mess with anybody's beer.
Grab the gusto.
You got it.
The Great Circus Parade, how did that come about?
That came about in 1963. Ben Barkin, who has been on the show before.
Yes, he has.
And was in the PR business and very good friends with Bob Uihlein, who was president and chairman of Schlitz at the time, approached Bob, who was also a horseman himself, a polo player, and loved horses, loved parades, said to Bob, why don't you consider this as a give back to the city of Milwaukee by providing this circus parade. Baraboo, Wisconsin is the home of the Circus World Museum, so all the wagons were just less than 100 miles away. And with the cooperation of Chappie Fox, who's also been on the show.
Great Chappie.
He and Ben worked with Bob Uihlein. They put this parade together, and it got bigger and bigger every year.
It was the Schlitz Circus Parade when it started out.
And
the big Schlitz wagon.
That's right. That and all the other wagons and animals and people and marching bands. And eventually it turned into a very busy weekend with fireworks. The circus was in town at that time, so they had a private performance for the Schlitz employees, and then
that must have been cool.
It was to fill up that Milwaukee arena with all Schlitz people.
Wow.
And they had the parade, they had fireworks that night, and it was a very exhausting weekend, I should say that, in those early years. The parade went on for a number of years, and then they started doing it every couple of years, and then stopped for a while, and Bill Fox has tried to bring it back a few times. It's just been very difficult.
Well, I've had the great pleasure of sort of emceeing the circus parade when we televised it here. In fact, we did the first I think I'm right, in his first live high-definition program on network, PBS.
Really?
And it was the circus parade.
On the circus
yeah,
parade.
and it was, oh, that was a thrill. Well, I'm thinking of you, though, and one of the things I remember from the circus parade, and anybody who saw it can never forget, the 40-horse hitch.
That was an incredible wagon and 40 horses run by Dick Sparrow, a farmer out of Iowa. His hobby was horses. And somehow Bob Uihlein found him and said, why don't you be in our parade?
Wow.
And what it takes to move 40 horses in vans, plus the wagon and all the equipment, the harnesses, it was just incredible. I was lucky enough to ride on that wagon.
Did you?
In 1972, in Cheyenne Frontier days,
wow.
I had made it known to Schlitz that I'd love to go for a ride in it sometime. And I was living in Denver at the time, in college at the time in Denver, during the summer, went up to Cheyenne, put on a uniform so I'd look like the rest of the workers on the wagon, and rode the wagon, sat right behind Dick Sparrow.
I have been on that wagon also, and tell people what it's like to look out over 40 horses.
Incredible. They were 4 abreast, 10 deep, but solid horse.
Yeah, and he had to think so far in advance, because if I want to turn that corner, I got to turn it when those horses way up there are at the corner.
It's not like turning a car.
No.
They had outriders, and that would help direct it. Luckily, they never had any accidents or runaway horses, because imagine 40 horses running.
Oh.
Not good.
Don't tell it to me. I got run over at that circus parade. The famous one where I think it was Cinderella's wagon, which fortunately worked with I think Welsh ponies, and it went out of control and came crashing into our set. Yes.
I do remember that.
Yeah,
yes.
so do I. That was up until that moment. I really, if I was on television, nothing bad could happen. I mean, I've petted tigers. I remember sitting next to a guy who had 2 full-grown male timber wolves who decided they didn't like each other in the middle of the show and started snarling. And I just, nothing bad can happen.
Talk through it, yeah.
Yes, until...
Better than being run over by Cinderella.
Yeah. Well, we can talk. What was the 9 Mile Farm?
9 Mile Farm was a 125-acre piece of land in Bayside on Lake Michigan. And that's where Schlitz used to keep their horses.
Oh.
Back prior to automobiles and trucks for delivery use, they delivered beer in wagons.
I never thought of that, but sure, they would have to.
And Schlitz had stables down at the brewery, but they needed many, many horses to deliver this beer, so they kept their spare horses out at a farm, and they appropriately called it the 9 Mile Farm because it was 9 miles from the brewery.
I see.
And it would take a day to get the horses out there. They would rest for a week to 10 days and then be brought back. And so they had hundreds of horses that they'd rotate back and forth. As time went on in the 1970s, the Schlitz Foundation was overseeing the horses went out of, the backtrack a minute, the horses went out of use in the 40s, early 40s. But the property just lay dormant, and they had a skeet shooting range for a gun club to lease this range. Otherwise, it was a picnic area for the Uihleins and all the relatives.
Well, that was kind of nice.
And very nice. The Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts would use it. A lot of charity groups would use it for entertainment, for functions. And in the early 70s, a number of relatives campaigned to develop that land, either as a golf course or a condominium project.
Well, it makes sense. It's beautiful, right on Lake Michigan.
Yeah, but a lot of people, there were louder voices that said we should keep it a nature center because it was all natural nature, former farmland and pasture. And they worked out a deal with the National Audubon Society to take over the land, and it was named the Schlitz Audubon Nature Center.
So that's how that came about.
And that's what it is today.
But there was some conflict.
There was some conflict.
Yeah, I can certainly understand it. I mean, you're talking about a lot of profit as opposed to giving it to a charity.
Well, now it's essentially given back to the city of Milwaukee as a nature center, and an incredible place to go back and see it again.
Do you miss it as a place for the family picnics?
Well, I do, but I don't. It's good to see it shared with everybody else. I was lucky enough to be on the board of directors at the Audubon Center for 23 years. And so I was able to keep tabs on it, and still a beautiful piece of property. We
were kidding before we went on the air about your name, Uihlein, and we talked about the Erlanger because nobody could figure out how to pronounce Uihlein. There are a lot of different pronunciations, and there is a Uihlein packing company. Now, is that part of your family?
That's part of our family. August Uihlein was one of 9 children. And so one of
No wonder they didn't want any more Uihleins working for the place.
multiplied very rapidly. And one of the Edward Uihlein went to Chicago shortly after the Chicago fire to run the Schlitz distribution center business, and his family stayed there. Somehow they changed their name to Uihlein. My direct cousins of my generation created a packaging business out of their garage called Uihlein Packaging, and now they've got distribution centers around the country.
It's a pretty significant place out
and
of the
almost
garage.
every box you see would have the name Uihlein on the bottom of it. It's turned into a very successful business.
And what was the original pronunciation and spelling?
Uihlein.
Uihlein.
With
it was
a
an
U,
umlaut, right?
an umlaut over the U, H-L-E-I-N. They dropped the umlaut, put an I in, Americanized.
To make it easy.
I think to make it easy, and also more confusing.
30 seconds left. How would you like people to remember the Schlitz Brewing Company and the Uihlein family?
It was quite a venture for the Uihlein family. I think they did a lot for the city, donated a lot to the city. I think the beer built up the image of the city. Skip the Laverne and Shirley jokes on that one, but it made Milwaukee the beer capital of the world along with the other breweries, and I think the Uihleins contributed a lot to it, as did Milwaukee.
We have Uihlein Hall. We've got the Schlitz Audubon Nature Society.
Uihlein Field,
yes,
the
exactly.
soccer park.
Yeah, which used to be a polo field.
That's right, that's right.
I spent many a happy day there eating brats and drinking Schlitz beer, as a matter of fact.
And you drank the right beer.
I certainly did. Peter Uihlein, thanks so much. What a pleasure. We wanted to do the story of Schlitz for so long. Thanks for coming in.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. As always, hope you'll join us next time as we continue to remember. Thank you.